So on your tables there is a handout called Recreate Through Pantomime. You can use that to follow along. In Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, How Little Things Can Make a Big Difference, he talks about this study that was done in the 60s, where this guy took a 4.5-second clip of film. It's this woman talking to this man and this child. And he takes that 4.5 seconds of film and he breaks it down frame by frame by frame. And he studies it for the next 1.5 years of his life. And at the end, he makes this. We're having trouble hearing me? So at the end of this 1.5 years of studying this 4.5-second clip of film, he makes this startling discovery that little things make a big difference. Like how your shoulder dips when you're talking or your eyes move. The problem as writers is sometimes we can have trouble transferring that onto the written page. And so the concept that I want to teach tonight, Recreate Through Pantomime, is that the action of taking a moment in time and going back in your memory and thinking about everything that you did and then putting it on paper. Now, this works really well for nonfiction, but it can work, or for fiction, or for nonfiction, but it can work really well for nonfiction too. You just have to be a little more observant. The first time I realized that I was doing this, I was writing this great little story about my niece. It was her birthday, and my family's really big on big birthday dinners, and my father was going to say grace before the meal. And so he's praying away, and all of a sudden it occurs to me she's going to be 6. And I'm thinking, this is the first time she's going to be cognizant of the fact that she's being prayed for. So I'm typing away as I remember this event, and I wrote, I peeked through my fingers to see her reaction. And as soon as I wrote that, it sounded so cliche, so ridiculous. And I thought, why is that ridiculous? Well, it's ridiculous because adults don't peek through their fingers. That's something a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old does. So this is what I wrote instead. As the prayer began to wrap up, I couldn't help myself. With my head leaned against my folded hands, I looked at Zoe and was astonished at what I saw. As her name was mentioned, a smile crossed her face and her small arms began to pump up and down in the victory cheer. Grandpa was praying just for her, and she might as well have been shouting, "That's right, God bless me." But what I did to get to that moment was I closed my eyes and I thought about being there at the table. And I remembered I didn't peek through my fingers. I just put my elbows on the table and leaned forward. And so doesn't that give a more real feel to the story? Well, once I realized I was doing this, I started looking for those elements in other people's writing, and it's everywhere with good writing. I don't know if any of you have ever read the books by Ralph Moody, Little Britches, Man of the Family. If you haven't, it's beautiful writing. It's nonfiction about this boy and his family in the early 1900s. And if you don't know this story, I'm going to ruin it for you a little bit, but his father has passed away, and so there's 5 children and just the mom left, and they're desperately trying to stay together as a family, and the children have figured out this way to earn some money, and they've brought this first fairly large sum of money to their mother. Well, you can imagine as a mother, she broke down and started crying. Well, it would be very easy just to write, she cried, but this is what he wrote. Mother didn't very often cry unless she was real happy. She cried when I gave her the $6. At first, she just looked at the money as if she didn't believe it was real. It was a $5 gold piece and a cartwheel. Then her eyes filled. She pressed the end of her thumb against her teeth for half a minute, as she always did when she was trying not to cry. And then she just bubbled over. I mean, we've all seen people do that. When I try not to cry, I push like this, really hard. But we each do something different. And to me, that just, when I read that, I could see her. I was her child, watching her try not to cry. This really helps you get away from those cliches like peeked through my fingers or leapt out of bed. I mean, let's face it, who leaps out of bed? The last time I leapt out of bed, I was 7 years old. And the only reason I did it was because my 5-year-old sister thought it would be really funny if she caught a whole bunch of moths and stuck them in the sheets. So when I was laying there and I felt these things crawling all over me, I did not disappoint her. I did leap out of bed. But you have to reserve that for a true leap. I wanted to bring a fictional example. This is from the series, the #1 Lady Detective Agency books. And in this is another crying example. Mama Makutsi, her fiance, has been in an accident. And this is how it's written. Then Mama Makutsi looked up at her and said, "Foodie is in the hospital. There's been an accident." And she began to weep, dropping her head onto her forearms and rocking backwards and forwards in that curious motion that is perhaps a subconscious attempt to mimic the movement that brings comfort to a tiny baby. You've seen people cry like that. And the thing about crying is that we cry in a whole bunch of different ways, so it has to fit the moment. I mean, sometimes it's just a tear, sometimes it's the like, so you have to go back and think, what really fits what I'm trying to write? Much like dialogue, though, this technique will really slow your writing down. So if you're trying hard to get to a point, you don't want to put all this detail in. But sometimes putting that in really just brings the scene alive for people. So I brought an example of where I really slowed the writing down. This was a rollerblading accident I had last summer. "Don't fall!" I heard my sister-in-law Loretta scream as I flew over the rose brambles and hit the ground with a thud. How much time had passed since my rollerblades hit the rutsy asphalt, and I'd started my hasty descent into the ditch? 1 second? Maybe 2? Yet it would take several sentences to adequately describe what happened in that brief space of time. When the crack in the path caught my skate and jerked me off balance, I decided not to fall on the pavement and pointed my body towards the side of the path. Quickly, I realized a fall here would mean an afternoon of picking gravel out of my skin. But the ditch, it was full of tall, soft grass, the perfect landing pad. Once headed for the ditch, changing course was no longer an option. That's when I saw the wall of roses with the base of thick, thorny stalks. With the words, "Don't fall," ringing in my ears, my legs pushed through a few giant steps and then launched into the leap of a lifetime. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I slid forward on my wrist braces and knee pads and came to a sliding stop. So hopefully that kind of takes you there to that day. I'm still in one piece, so I survived. I put 3 different options for you to practice on. Kind of all based on what we talked about today, but if you want to pick a different event, but I put, describe the physical actions you take when you try to keep from crying. Think back to a time where you were actually trying not to cry and write that out. Or you could choose a time where you actually did cry and just write what kinds of, did you cry until tears were running through your fingers or what happened there? Or really explain the process that you go through when you get out of bed each morning. And I have to tell you that a while back I was trying to write about checking my clock in the middle of the night, and I actually went and laid on my bed and thought about what I do when I try to look at the clock in the middle of the night. And I think I left you like 2 minutes to practice. So thank you very much.